thank these people that put this on. I mean, Anna Marie, Kelly, Vanessa, and Elisa. They did a great job for the food. Terrific job, because this started out as we'll just have some chips and crackers and cheese, and then it evolved into a much more elaborate situation where Kelly wanted to have sort of a Emmy-like production where they could display their Emmys, and here they are. So there's 3 real Emmys that demonstrate that I have good judgment because I work with people. I may not know what I'm doing, but they do, and that's what's important. The biometric measures, to answer your question, are different kinds of tests that we use to measure areas in the mind tracking phenomena. Now what happens is when you enter a hot area, for example with Eli, obviously his mother did something extremely deleterious to him, smashed the side of his face with an iron, destroyed his looks forever, and destroyed his possibility of developing into a productive, is that your phone? into a productive person. He held this hostility and anger, and the only fault that the victim had that you saw in the clip, Joyce, is that she resembled the mother. So once you get into these areas where there's subtle psychophysiological reactions to what's going on, then it's my job to interpret what happens. And my job in Silicon Valley for 30 years has been to try and figure out those people that couldn't be figured out. They did crimes, but they really didn't know why. So.
And I think the test, I mean, we had to, I could write we did a lot of shooting around the things that he does, but that's part of what the series would bring out are these different techniques he uses, biometrics, which is this sort of thing, and reading the body temperature under, like when somebody starts getting stressed, as well as those photos are the thematic apperception test.
That's right.
Which are these? They're funny because they're from like the 1930s. These photos, but they still use them, and they're just to elicit a person's how they would view a situation for him to analyze. And the last thing is hypnotism.
That's right.
Like, woo. But yeah, really getting these people into a state of relaxing, I guess. He still holds secrets about how it actually all works, but hypnoanalytical kind of ideas where that person actually eventually can get to the root of where their trauma, what has triggered their deviant behavior.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right. Along those lines, let me ask, is it pretty common that people who have caused you trauma in the past are the cause of your motivations to murder?
Well, that's a good question. This is Dr. Future, who's famous in his own right on a local radio show once a week on Tuesdays, right?
Tuesdays at 2.
It's just
Yeah.
104.1?
It's a great show. It's a great show. So there are a lot of these kinds of people going back a long time. But one of the questions that somebody asked me at one of these gatherings is, how did you get into this? I got into this when I was in high school because it was a very famous case in Chicago. You can tell I'm from Chicago. In 1924 that I heard about later, which was a famous murder case, Loeb and Leopold case, where these 2 young men who were graduate students, they were 18 years old, and they were graduate students at the University of Chicago, and they murdered Bobby Franks, a 13-year-old boy. At the 20 years later, my father, who was a dentist, did volunteer work at Stateville Prison in Illinois, and he worked on Nathan Leopold's molars, or teeth, at the time. Do you use my services?
case is really bad. Typically, when I get a case where, you know, the implications have lots of punishment, I need to explain some pretty outrageous acts. I call the doc so he can do the tests and give me a report, and I can use that when I'm negotiating with the judge and the district attorney. That's what it works.
Okay, so that's, yeah, thanks, Chris. So that's on a pre-trial basis to present evidence in mitigation as to why a person committed a particular crime and whether there are psychological mitigators in there. On some cases, you're called in to develop what's called an NGI, not guilty by reason of insanity plea, to see whether or not the defendant is legitimate or whether they're malingering symptoms in order to more or less beat the rap, right? You can also do it on a post-conviction basis, as in this particular case, in the Eli case, where the judge wanted to know, why did this person do it? When he had $400 million, he had everything to live for, he had it all laid out for him, Stanford PhD, electrical engineering, big house, Los Altos Hills, everything. Why did he turn to murder? So the judge wanted to know on a post-conviction basis why he committed this crime. So you have three phases. You have pre-trial, you have trial evidence as mitigators, then you have a post-trial basis. The family might hire you, Mrs. Future. The family could hire you and say, why did my son do this? What happened? The situation that Kelly alluded to, which is a little different on the severity scale, is this man in Silicon Valley that rescued cars. Now, some people, I know people that rescue cats, but he rescued cars, and when he was arrested, he was offended. It was at a very famous, the Rainbow Car Wash on the El Camino in Santa Fe, famous place. When he's arrested, he's offended because he's trying to fix up this stolen car. the sheriff thought this guy has got to be nuts, so he's arrested. The attorney from Summit Law, Richard Weiss, calls me and he said, I got a real one for you. This guy collects cars and reclamates them and then returns them to their owner.
Oh my God.
What he should have worked at a car wash and not stolen cars.
Yes, Richard.
So if somebody picks this up, what is the full episode gonna look like? Is it gonna
Oh, it's
be-
going to look great.
Good answer.
What are the special effects?
Come on. This isn't evidence.
We're going to have, Rafa's going to film it. It's going to look fantastic. We're gonna have-
Well, let me be more specific. Let's see. Is it gonna be like a reenactment of the crimes? Is it
Yeah,
gonna
we're
be
gonna see.
Well, actually,
documentary type? What's it gonna be
There's
like?
I guess they call this a hybrid sort of, where you're doing like reenactments that are sort of dramatized
Yeah.
with a host who's telling the story,
Okay.
which is Dr. Brady. And in the media world, when they churn these crime shows out, they like format. It's all about the format. So this has a wonderful format, in my opinion, because you've got you've got some pretty basic elements. You've got the crime that already was committed, so it's not a who done it. It's
Exactly.
a why done it, and then you've got going back in time in different time spaces of the criminal being assessed by Dr. Brady in a reenactment, as well as their previous life before the crime, and then you have this resolution, as well as this kind of kooky idea that we're still kind of working on. It was a fun thing to do this, to figure this out. Is this literally going into the mind space of the criminal and trying to create visual effects that would draw an audience into like, oh, this is where, how would you imagine they'd be thinking about things? And so I kind of think, like, we talked a lot about dreams, like we called it a mindscape. Yeah.
It's really interesting space actually, and it's strangely like perfectly resonates with now. What you were doing, or still doing with the electrodes. It's really reverberates with a lot of technologies that are just happening right now where they could actually read action potentials inside the brain and tell what a person is thinking, and even, be able to copy down what a person is visually thinking and see it on a monitor. And so, this idea of being able to peer inside somebody's intentions is really just so, right here, right now. And then the other thing that was really just was so, great about this series of, this, series of works or cases that you've had over the years, is that it's in Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley is really sort of a bizarre place, overall. You have this inordinate amount of wealth, but it's in these really, contained little pockets, and oftentimes befalls on people who don't really have the psychological wherewithal to deal with it, and then they end up with some pretty strange habits like Eli here.
Got one there and then one after.
So just really on that note with bizarre places and bizarre people, have you hooked up any of these brain scanning electrodes to Kelly so we can figure out?
Machine fried.
I broke it, Andrew.
Andrew, some of
He's tried.
some of these cases, it's so obvious when somebody is so well adjusted as Kelly. I don't need to hook her up. Now, Ethan,
He hasn't hooked me up
I'm not
yet.
so sure yet.
He has tested me on, I've tried to withstand though and not let him get inside my head.
Let me say one thing
Yeah.
about, to pick up on what Ethan said about the VR experience. The VR experience, as I see it, we didn't pull it off on the first round. But the second round, here's what you do. You create those experiences in Eli's life from childhood. He sees those experiences, whether it's a playground, a school, whether it's at home with this terrible mother that ruins him by hitting him in the head with a hot iron, whether it's the father who was a wealthy doctor in San Jose, but he was gone 95 hours a week. So you put this into these scenarios with an Oculus Rift headset on. You run these through, you run these scenarios through his consciousness, and when he gets into a critical area, which could be somebody bullied him, let's say, somebody tried to assault him sexually, somebody beat him, the mother hit him with an iron, whatever it is, that would show up in the VR, and you would have a small window into why this person became the person that they did with Eli 32 years later. So it's a phenomenon that can be achieved. Right now, with the pictures that Kelly's talking about, those are two-dimensional pictures. Ethan did a great job by exploding that one picture of the woman that represents the mother who's evil,
Yeah.
which you could have the transferability of these kinds of thoughts that could be used for nefarious ends, such as governmental ends in that movie, as I remember it. What we're trying to do is to do it for altruistic reasons or good reasons, so the person won't recidivate, they won't do it again, and it might help other people from not committing certain kinds of crimes once we can identify that they have these neural patterns or whatever we can tease out from a VR headset.
Are we down with the altruistic part?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we're definitely, we don't want to incite madness. I know this guy's been, was it something about the mother?
Helpful.
Oh.
No, actually, I have a question about the technology.
Okay, hold on though.
Okay.
You're next, because I was going to give this gentleman who's been raising his hand for a while, and then Kristen.
So what's the education and training for a forensic psychologist?
Little as possible, just get in there and do it. No, I mean, as I said, my interest in this developed when I was in high school. So then I went to college, and the first day, the first week, the first month, I majored in psychology. Then I majored in criminology. This was at Illinois. And then came out to UC Berkeley and studied criminology. So it's always been my interest to try and figure out the inner workings of people. And what's your name?
Miguel.
Miguel. The bottom line is it's immensely fun. It's immensely, no, it's intriguing and it's heuristic. I mean, it really makes you think when you're sitting across the table from this guy in a jail cell, in a prison, and I've been in all different locations, how can you figure out, what can you use to trigger the diagnosis to make this person understand why they did something initially? So it's fun.
So these people are
Chris-
willing,
oh.
right? They're willing to be put into
Analyzed.
these situations?
Are they willing?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of psychological literature written on the compulsion to confess. Theodore Reich was a very famous 1930s psychologist, and he wrote a book by that name, which is the compulsion to confess. Deep down, the psychoanalytic theory is that people want to admit why they did something, but there's something that prevents them. In Eli's case, the preventative part was that he wanted to get even with somebody who looked like his mother. And by the way, his mother was committed to Napoli State Hospital, and shortly after he visited her, the mother disappeared. So it's pretty clear when he talks about this time I'm going to kill her, that he probably killed the mother also. Of course, to be more specific on your question, yes, there are certain people that are just malevolent and don't want to know. But the great number of people who I'm called upon by attorneys, judges, private people, prosecutors to try and analyze do want to get into this realm of the compulsion to confess.
I want to take a moment and point to Kristen, but Kristen, you can ask a question, but I have a question for you.
Okay.
How?
Oh, you
yeah.
asked me first. Go ahead.
Well, you, okay. All right. How was it working on the set and playing an evil mother as a person who does mostly plays versus now a big camera in front of your face?
Yeah, that was super hard. Because it was violent. It was violent. The movement was violent. The words were violent, and yet I had to not use any volume, not use any movement. That was really, really hard.
You know, I spent a long time looking at your actions over and over
Yeah.
and over again. You know, subtly deforming your face and all sorts of things like that. But it really was great. I mean, you know, the actors all around it, all around the clock were really good. But you know, there was a lot of emotion transmitted through many of your takes.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
very good, nice. But your question?
Well, my question was, if people have a repressed memory, if they don't if Eli in this case didn't even remember this example, this experience when his mother burned him, can the technology pull it out? Or do they have to actually remember what happened?
Well, you can, let me turn this thing off. I was trying to call Ethan before. Once again, it goes back to the issue of volitional. Is it a volitional thing? Does the person want to figure out why they engage in certain behaviors? If they don't want to, I mean, that's called in counseling, and I can tell the people in here who've been in counseling because they have insight. If they don't want to do it, it's called resistance in treatment. If you can trigger something with an image that will make them respond psychophysiologically, they've got stuff on them and suddenly they're responding, and then you follow up with a question, well, I guess when you saw that Lincoln at that car wash, it stimulated something, and suddenly we've got EEG stuff going up and down. So now you know you're into an area that is hot for that person, even though this guy, his name was, I think, Paul Hamlin, even though Paul didn't say anything, we can see that we're into an area that needs resolution because we want to decondition this guy. We want this guy to be treated for his addiction so he doesn't do it again.
Okay, cinematically, the film that comes to mind was the beginning of Ridley Scott's film, not Brainstorms, but Blade Runner.
Okay.
Okay, with the scene with the device on the head, and he's been asking psychological questions, and then they build the tension. The scene reminded me a little bit of that scene there. It was a very profound moment in which it triggered off a reaction on the part of the.
Sure.
Yeah.
Exactly, with the Clockwork Orange.
But I ask you this: in this situation, how did the murderer respond to your diagnosis?
How did he respond?
Yeah, like when you told him your mother was involved, and that you saw him, did he stop and start thinking about that?
Oh, yeah. So that comes in the resolution, in the therapy resolution.
Yeah.
So in this teaser, we're just getting into the overview to the audience of what happened from the beginning of the crime with the girl knocking on the door to her taking Rohypnol, being drugged. Obviously, she's dead. So with the exploded version or a longer episode, a complete episode, you would go through the entire therapeutic process where he would be deconditioned. He would be deconditioned because maybe this impulse isn't gone away. Maybe he hasn't killed the mother yet. We don't know. But he might want to, or he might want to recidivate and kill somebody else. So in the deconditioning part, which is prolonged exposure therapy, which lends itself to a VR application,
That's right, yeah.
is trying to create a mosaic of something of Humpty Dumpty who's shattered. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
How about one more question, then I have a question for somebody back there, but yeah.
Okay, is the format of the show going to be kind of case studies and episodic and real people? And if so, are they still susceptible or available for treatment? Or do you bring people to resolution, or you only do people who are already dead? Or what is the criteria?
This was when Dr. Brady approached me at first. He was like, let's do this. I said, oh, okay, go find me some criminals if you want to do the real event. How do we do that? You know, it's a very difficult thing to do, actually. So initially, given our, financing and what you can do in a situation with a trailer, that's why I suggested let's, go back to some of your old cases and look at it that way.
So these are like safe cases. These people aren't
They're-
going to come after
they're
you in
already-
real life now.
Yeah, it's from the past. So a lot of the series would be, the way it's been pitched is it's centered around the 1990s, boom in Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
We would like to weave in some of those themes, a little bit about Silicon Valley as well, which didn't get enough into 5 minutes. But that would be another theme to it.
Thank you.
But however, and it's actually, apparently true crime shows, which are super popular, I had no idea, are more, the majority of people who watch them are women, also
Really?
something I didn't know. They, a lot of them do want that present day investigation. But I think also there are there's interest in some of this kind of hybrid stuff where you're doing kind of dramatic reenactments, a little more higher edge drama.
Wouldn't you agree that good storytelling and good psychological inquiry trumps everything else? You can have the most realistic present-day cases that aren't interesting because they're not resolved and you're not going in and mind-tracking somebody to figure out what they did. The key here, the tie-in here is that these are 1990s, this is Silicon Valley boom. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there, and I know about it because I'm in the criminal justice system. I know about what goes on, but the general public, a lot of the stuff is kind of pushed to the side, if you know what I mean, by some of the big boys that control the media. It's not a conspiratorial notion, it's a real notion where certain kinds of crimes are suppressed from the rest of us. So there's part of the naked underbelly of Silicon Valley is emergent in these episodes.
However,
all my cases are from Silicon Valley.
yeah. And personally, I like the exploring the 1990s boom time period as well and going back in time. But we do have also another proposal pitch for something that would be more present day, which we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's interesting to try to figure out how to present the material that's, especially I think with crime stories too, because there's a lot of legal aspects involved when you put it on television.
Yeah, I want to say one last thing, because I know we're running late. I mean, I want to thank, Kelly and Ethan and Anna Marie for having some sort of understanding of my garbled pitch to them early on, what this was really all about. So,
Yeah, how did you guys connect? I think that's the story. Tell us.
well,
I think Ethan called me up and said, "Oh, you got to meet this trippy guy. I'm going to meet him with him tomorrow." I was like, "All right, I'll go."
and he ends up murdering somebody 32 years ago. What happened in that 32 years to put this kid off the track? That's the storytelling. And my summation was that I really thank both of you, all three of you actually, for having the confidence that this is a good storytelling scenario, and it makes psychological sense, and it's entertaining. So, Ethan, thank you. And I want to give Kelly a hand.
I think, actually I had one tiny thing. Janelle, won't you come up here? No. I just had to, this is our lovely, beautiful high school student / soon-to-be director, producer, actress in her own right, who also worked. How did you like working on the project she worked with us for 3 days and was fabulously good. What did you think about it all?
I think I'd never learned so much in 3 days than I have probably in my entire life. That includes my calculus class. Put on one of these things, and it was a good experience.
I cater to say that. No. She was really fantastic too. In fact, I've worked with production assistants who aren't as competent as this one was, so I hope the best for her. I hope we can hire her soon when she's out of school.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Brady. Thank you, Vanessa Brady, for that lovely this is Almost Human Media Studios. As you can see, it's a studio, more or less.
Yeah.
And
More.
Want to do a little plug for what we're doing here. We do events here. We do events. We do sort of TED-like talks here.
one and a fourth potentially, but we have good feedback from one right now. But I literally started pitching this, 3 weeks ago.
Wow.
So we'll see. I don't want to, like we said, we
Yeah,
want to jinx anything.
It's new. Okay, so-
But the
so-
plan is, at 10. I literally wrote up on Friday the 10 episodes.